Fiji, and welcome to the Brunch on My TV. I'm Ilaitia Ravuwai.
And I'm Lusi Banuve. Thank you for joining us this beautiful Friday morning. We hope you're having a great day so far.
We have lots to cover today, including a chat with the Executive Director for Dialogue Fiji, Nilesh.
And also, we'll be speaking with entrepreneur and content creator Jeanette Smith from Taviuni.
But first, before we get into that, let's take a look at the headlines this morning. On the MyTV website, national budget passed after 4 days of scrutiny.
And on the front page of the Fiji Times, disappointed landowners take their concerns directly to the Prime Minister, while economist Kishti Sen tips Fijian economy to beat budget forecast.
And in the Fiji Sun, claims are baseless. FICAC finds insufficient evidence for corruption probe into the CJ and DPP, Lucy.
Wow. But joining us now to discuss these stories and more is Fiji Times Editor-in-Chief Fred Wesley. Good morning, Fred. Thank you for joining us.
Bula, and good morning, Lai. Good morning, Lucy. Thank you for having me.
Now, Fred, on your front page, you covered the Vatulele landowners who brought their concerns straight to the capital yesterday. What can you tell us about that?
Well, yes, Lai, thank you. It's been 6 long years. 6 years. They say they gave up the lease for the construction and also facilitating of a resort, a luxury resort. And today, traditional, well, as of yesterday, the traditional landowners still didn't have anything concrete, and they were, according to them, they were losing out in terms of financial gain. So the next best course of action, or probably the best course of action for them, they felt, was to come in and have an appointment with the Prime Minister, Sitiveni, and that's what they did yesterday. Again, in saying that, it's been a while since we saw something like this, where people took their grievances straight up to the office, and with placards and all of that. The last one I think we saw was when the Women's Crisis Center protested against the Israelis, and talking about the atrocities.
Thank you, Fred. Last night also the budget, Parliament rather, passed a $4.87 billion, quite big. What was, during the week, what were some of the things that stood out for you?
Well, if I'm to go straight through to the from Monday onwards, I think that the big ones that stood out and obviously made it into the front page of the Fiji Times. We had Sugar's hard truth, and that was off an interview with the permanent secretary for finance, Shiri Gounder, and he actually spoke about farmers being fooled, and he was talking about reviving the industry. Obviously, there were responses to the effect of people suggesting diversification and reforms, and we also had the coke find scare, and that was off Mau village. And the Mau village, for those who know or those who don't know, it's just by Nambukavesi on the way to Navua. I think one of the interesting things, or one of the scary things here, is the fact that such packages, and then this one was of cocaine, such packages have been discovered close to the capital city of Suva. We also had a story that came off the Lau Provincial Council, and they meet in here in Suva, and they actually did a presentation of the submission to the Constitutional Review Commission, and they're talking about the role of the military, and this is coming off the wake of the Commander Ro Kaluniwai, who spoke about the removal of the immunity clause. Now the Lau Provincial Council is actually talking about relooking at section 131, subsection 2 of the 2013 Constitution, And this is about the role of the military in the security of our nation and people. So that was another interesting story that we had. And then there was a call for an audit on everything to do with FSC and the sugar industry. And this came off a couple of people. It was also mentioned in Parliament by a member, the opposition member of Parliament. I think it was Fijian Drua. But again, a lot of things happened this week, and then we have a lot of things happening on the sporting field as well. But I'm sure you all know Spain and Argentina through to the final of the FIFA World Cup.
Fred, thank you. What about the investigations by FICAC, which concluded yesterday on the Chief Justice and the acting DPP rather?
Yes, we also had that. We have also covered that, and again, and it's coming off after at the tail end of all of that. I keep using this term interested. There are interesting developments there, but again, we are not legal minds. We're not legal heads. I suppose at the end of the day, FICAC has said what it wanted to say, and obviously the lady overseas has said what she wanted to say, and it's for us to now consider the two views and decide what's what in this, the greater scheme of things.
Fred, you talked about the submission by the people of Laos.
Yes.
I think one thing that we picked out too from that submission was they are calling for the separation of powers. How in the Constitution they're saying that too much power was vested into the PM and the AG's office to make decisions on FICAC appointments and every other thing, which then led to what they said about how the military, what you shared earlier. For Newswise, Fred, how do you see this playing out? Do you think it's something that could take place?
Well, realistically, this is the way it should be. I keep talking about democracy, and I keep talking about the value of mainstream media, and why there's a role. There's a very, very important role for mainstream media to be disseminating such information. I think what people need to understand is, the Constitutional Review Commission is there to listen, take in recommendations, listen to submissions, and put something together, whether it's amendments to the Constitution or whether it's a revamp of the Constitution, but and ensure that it's a basis where the people are suggesting things, people are making submissions, and people are part of it. So when you look at what's been happening lately over the past few weeks. First, it was the Army commander, who spoke about the removal of the immunity clause. I mean, that coming from the Army commander, that was a powerful statement that particular day.
Yes.
And then now you have the Lao Provincial Council, who are talking about the removal or the amendment or the changing or the relooking at Section 131, Subsection 2 of the Constitution. And you're talking about powers vested to the military. You're talking about the military's role in the greater scheme of things. Been the sort of last bastion of hope for Fiji. But then they're also talking about the negative implications of that and why it should be removed. So these are different views, but I see a trend where people are actually talking about issues that we previously thought was sensitive. And I think that's a great thing. That's a great thing when that's been raised now.
Fred, from things, heavy stuff like the CRC submissions and from the Lao Provincial Council and the budget, now I just want to ask your opinion. Flying Fijians take on Scotland on Sunday morning. You're a former sports journalist. Tell me, what do you think of the lineup that was announced by Coach Senni Rusi this morning? Do you think Fiji can do it against the Scottish side?
I'm always a patriot. I'm a big fan of the Flying Fijians, and I'll be honest. The last two games against Wales and England, were disappointing. I talk about the lack of time and all of that in preparation, but then I remind the editors here that the Barbarians, they played Wales and they didn't have much time. They probably only had 3 days to prepare, but they held Wales. They held Wales. And people tell me about England, and I say England came off a losing streak, for crying out loud. Like we had a couple of weeks by then to play them and one game under our belt. But in saying that, again, as I said earlier, I'm a very, very strong Flying Fijians fan, always. And I look ahead to, I note the selections, and I'm looking to a good game. Sometimes we forget that Fiji, the players can make a difference if they're tuned on, if they're motivated on the field on the day. And you just have to look at the game against England, where they held the English scrum. Remember, England had or has one of the strong scrums in world rugby, but we held them. We held the Wallaby scrum, and they were inspiring moments for people like me. I had goosebumps just watching that. But anyway, whatever happens, still a few Fijians fan, looking forward with a lot of positivity to see national coach Lusi Banuve and the team turn things around for us this weekend.
Lastly, for me, Fred, it's an election year, and we've just the government has just passed the budget. For you, you've been covering more elections than I have, and more budgets than I have. Does it feel like this is a election budget to you, or it doesn't feel like it, does it?
Well, I will go by what's been said in the public domain. Previously, when elections were around the corner, you'd have every MP and his dog screaming election budget. But in this particular instance, we've hardly seen that line of thought. But again, in saying that, we've come through challenging times in terms of the dynamics in our country, with fuel crisis and all, what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, the tensions in the Middle East, the Gulf, with Iran, Israel, and the US on one side, and then Donald Trump's said a pretty few interesting things this week. In fact, you kind of have this feeling you don't know what's going up and what's going down with the way the US is responding. But in saying that, to put a budget around this time, it's going to be a pretty difficult. Not difficult, not an easy thing to do. But again, looking forward to the elections. Anything can happen from now until February 6th.
Yeah.
They've ruled out municipal elections. I would have loved to have had that, to have seen that come through. But again, we're in Fiji.
Well, time has caught up with us, but Vinaka Levu Fred for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me, Vinaka, Lusi, Vinaka Lai.
Vinaka.
Thank you.
Vinaka, Fred.
Right.
This week, Fiji took a major step in weather monitoring and forecasting with the launch of the Windborne Global Sounding Balloon, or the GSB, and the 3D printed automatic weather station known as PAWS.
Now, Fiji is the first country in the Pacific region to implement these technologies through various collaborations. And joining us this morning is Mr. Harish Pratap, the technical officer with the Fiji Meteorological Service, to tell us more about this new technology and what it means for weather forecasting in Fiji. Good morning, Mr. Pratap.
Good morning, sir.
Mr. Pratap,
Okay,
in simple terms, what are the global sounding balloon and 3D printed automatic weather station, and how will they help improve weather forecasting in Fiji?
Okay, first we go for the windborne weather systems, weather balloon, the high altitude balloon. it's an American concept. The weather balloon, once upon release, it can stay in the atmosphere from average of 10 days to 335 days. Unlike our current normal balloons, which we release using hydrogen gas, and attached to it is a radio sound which collects the meteorological data, and it can give us readings of the atmosphere only in vertical direction. That is in ascending order of things, and max of about 2 hours, and the balloon will burst, and then there will be no more data. While the windborne system weather balloon, it called a high altitude balloon, can last more than 10 days, and it can be controlled from USA. So it can ascend according to our preferred rate, and we can direct the balloon towards a severe weather system if there is any within our Nindi area. So that is a huge advantage to our forecasters. So we can know if suppose there's a cyclone is in Vanuatu approaching Fiji, we can direct the balloon towards the cyclone and launch a drop sound. Drop sound will collect the required data from the system, and we will receive it on our office through the satellite communication system. And then we'll have a better idea and understanding of the severe weather systems, the direction where it's moving, and what is the actual wind speed for that system. At the present, we don't have this technology because it is quite expensive, and we are working with windborne systems, which they will provide. So in return, all the data gaps for the Pacific area will be fed into the global models. These global models also are used to predict the severe weather systems. So if we do not have data, then the global models, they scientifically calculate the gaps. So we are trying to fill all the gaps and better enhance the global models for the weather predictions.
Mr. Pratap, this
That
is
is
a
in
new
regards to
technology
the
for
weather
Fiji.
balloon. Thank you.
Mr. Pratap, this is a new
The-
technology for Fiji, a first of its kind. What does that mean? I mean, in weather monitoring, so to speak.
Okay, yes, you are correct. It is first, and it has been deployed in Fiji as the first Pacific Island country in the region. And like I earlier said, it means a lot in regards to meteorological science, especially for Fiji Met Service and the Fijian population at large. From the data we will collect from the drop zones carried by the weather balloon will be used in our daily forecasting. And especially during severe weather, we will be able to launch drop zones into the cyclone and see what wind speeds and directions the cyclone has. So that means we will have more accurate data, real-time data within our means. And using that real-time data and accurate data, then we can inform the public accordingly so that we are well prepared for any severe weather phenomena happening or which might affect our beautiful nation. Thank you.
Pratap, that's great news for Fiji. Thank you for joining us on the show, and we hope that you have a great day. Lucy?
Thank you, Shay.
Thank you.
We'll head to the break now, but when we come back, we'll be joined in studio by Nilesh Lal, the Executive Director of Dialogue Fiji. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the Brunch. We have in studio with us is the Executive Director for Dialogue Fiji, Nilesh Lal. Thank you, sir, for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
Bulvinaka Nilesh. Dialogue Fiji has consistently promoted evidence-based discussions. And when you look at the arguments presented by both government and opposition, where do you think there has been the biggest gap between political messaging and economic evidence?
Well, I think there has been a lot of political positioning that we've seen in the debate that has transpired this week. As I've said earlier on, the economy is too important to be politicized because we are a small island developing state with scarce resources. So economic policy making is something that we cannot afford to get wrong. Now, when there's political positioning on this, then obviously there's political considerations at play. So the kind of discourse that we have, the kind of public admissions that political actors are able to, that are comfortable with making, is of course shaped by political considerations all the while. So when that is the case, you cannot really have honest discussions on economic policy. And as I've said, that can be absolutely costly for a country like Fiji. But definitely there has been a disconnect from between the discourse and the evidence, and I hope that can be rectified. For instance, there has been talk of fiscal consolidation, but if you look at the actual budget figures, there's little evidence of it. There have been an attempt to bring about some restraint in spending, but if you look at it, the budget deficit is still around 7% of GDP. On the other hand, the opposition has been talking about public debt. Public debt for a very long time has been a political football in Fiji, and the government is finding that the shoe is on the other foot because they're quite critical, very strongly critical of public debt when they're in opposition. So that idea has changed for them, and I think there are some very damning statistics when it comes to the very substantial increase in public debt that is there. So the evidence is there that in non-crisis years, we have seen a very drastic increase in public debt with basically nothing to show for it except a whole lot of recurrent expenditure. So some of the concerns, of course, are genuine, but as we have continually emphasized, there's a need to bring about this shift in the kind of discourse that we have, so that political positioning has to be curtailed. There has to be a move, a shift that happens towards, towards discussion that is based purely on evidence, because the alternative is just too costly for a small island developing state like Fiji.
Mr. Lal, budgets are often filled with complex figures, deficit projections, economic terminology. Do you think the public is getting enough clarity on what the budget is all about, which actually means households, businesses, and the economy?
No, I don't think that is the case. No, I think we need to begin with a few simple facts. The government expects to collect around 3.8 billion in revenue, and it plans to spend around 3.9 billion, just under 4 billion on its operating expenditure. So that constitutes a operating deficit of around 177 million. Now, in the last fiscal year, there was an operating surplus, albeit a very small one, around 30 million. But for the first time in years, now we have an operating deficit. This basically means that the government is spending more in its operational expenditure than the operating revenue that it is able to generate. Now, this basically means that for every $100 of revenue that the government is collecting, it is spending $127. Now, this will, of course, translate into more debt over the years. Also, for every $100 that the government is spending, $82 of that goes into operating expenditure, and $18 goes into capital expenditure. And that, of course, is also a very concerning expenditure mix right there. So these figures actually show the scale of the choices that have been made. and the people need to be aware of the choices that have been made, and then be able to evaluate what these choices have been, what the trade-offs have been, and whether they have translated into good outcomes for the economy and ultimately in the interest of the people.
Sir, at what point does the government borrow shift from being a tool to support recovery into a risk that could restrain future generations?
Well, I think if the government continues to borrow for to finance its recurrent expenditure or its operating expenditure, then it becomes a huge risk for future generations, because borrowing should be should be directed only towards funding expenditure that increases the productive capacity of the economy, so that it benefits future generations. But if you are borrowing mainly for the consumption in the present time, and then burdening the future generations with the debt that you are that you are taking on just to fund your consumption today, then it becomes a huge concern, and it becomes a huge liability for future generations too.
So do you have any final comments before we go on to your submissions? This is in relation to the budget. Final comments on the overall budget itself.
Well, I think although there has been talk of fiscal consolidation, this is one of the biggest budgets, probably the biggest, in fact the biggest budget that we've seen. There is around a 4% increase in the total expenditure compared to the last budget. So it is going to be very significant in as far as public debt stock is concerned and so forth. So it is important that the implementation is done properly. If implementation is done properly, then we can end up having a much higher economic growth that has been projected. Now, because if you look at it, this budget is essentially a stimulus budget with a 7% GDP, 7% of GDP deficit. So what will be key is whether it is successful in creating that stimulus that is needed, because the government has talked about counter-cyclical spending. The purpose of that, of course, is to generate crisis, to generate stimulus when the economy is in a state of crisis. Now, whether that actually translates into doing that is something that will need to be assessed. It is for a country like Fiji. Increased spending by the state does not always lead to a stimulus, because we are very much a import dependent country. So a lot of the stimulus that is injected into the economy actually leaks out because we are importing much of the stuff. There's a risk that the government always needs to be aware of, but I think it makes sense to be stimulating the economy, because we've seen, particularly in 2019, when in a non-crisis year the government reduced its total expenditure, the economy actually shrunk, and that sort of reversed the trend that we had seen in the years before. So we have to be mindful of it. We have to actually measure very carefully whether it has led to stimulus. The other thing that I perhaps very quickly touch on is the fact that we are spending so much. The minister himself has said we are spending around $9 million a day just to sustain our public sector, and the size of the public sector has increased from around 38,000 people to 42,000, and this has been an increase of around 4,500 people in the last 3 years. That has been a huge increase. Now, whether that has led to better outcomes remains to be seen. It remains to be assessed, and the government needs to respond with evidence when it says that it has invested into more police personnel, it has invested into more doctors, more nurses, and so forth, because we know that a lot of that has also been invested into non-essential administrative staff and others, rather than this critical frontline staff that the government has emphasized in its budget defense that it has done in Parliament. So these are some of the things that we need to sort of respond to with evidence. We have to see whether, okay, waiting times at hospitals have decreased, whether police response has increased, and then only can we say that, okay, the growth that we've seen happen in the public sector, particularly in the last 3 years, has led to better outcomes.
Well, this is in relation to the Constitutional Review Commission. I understand that Dialogue Fiji had made submissions a couple of weeks ago, maybe last week. Overall, what has been Dialogue Fiji's submissions to the CRC?
Well, there's a number of things that we have proposed, one of which is to retain the democratic foundation, the progressive elements in the 2013 Constitution, which shouldn't be contested at all. I think they are quite non-negotiable for any modern, democratic, multi-ethnic society today. Things like secularism, equal citizenry, and one person, one vote, one value, a proportional representation system. I think there's ample evidence in the literature that these are elements that are needed for divided societies like ours. So we have submitted that some of these things be retained. However, there are some fundamental, and I would say maybe to an extent fatal structural flaws in the 2013 Constitution, which concentrate power in the executive arm. So the executive arm is effectively able to subdue all other institutions of the state. So we've made some very targeted proposals on how this element can be addressed, so that the executive arm's powers can be curtailed, so that there would be actual scope for various state institutions to play their role of providing oversight over government.
Mr. Lal, your submission says that Dialogue Fiji had, was reluctant to participate because you believe the process was flawed. Now, what changed? What made you rethink your stance and make the submission?
Well, the constitution of a country is so important that it cannot be abandoned. However flawed the process might be, if we do not participate, then we don't get to have a say. So we have expressed a lot of very serious reservations about how the process is being conducted, and I think any right-thinking person or institution would have those concerns. The process that we see happening today, for instance, I mean, right at the outset, anybody can see that it is a rush process. You do not do a comprehensive reform of the constitution in 5 months' time. 2 months is not sufficient to consult comprehensively, to be able to get views of everybody across the country, or most people across the country, into a constitution consultation process. The international benchmark is about 18 to 24 months for a comprehensive review. That is the usual time that is taken to review a constitution comprehensively. In the case of Fiji, what we've seen is Reeves Commission took around 2 years to review the 1990 constitution, which culminated into the 1997 constitution. The process was praised. The High Commission ran a 11-month consultation process, and that process was also very much praised in how transparent it was. Right? So what the High Commission did, for instance, I mean, one of the key things that stand out is that they received around 7,000 submissions, which was the highest ever number of submissions that have been received in Fiji during a constitutional review process. What they also did was publish every submission they received on a central website. Right? And there's also analysis public and so forth. Now, if you look at what this commission has been doing, they have not published anything. They do not even have a website. So nobody is able to ascertain what others have presented. So we can't go to a central website and see how many submissions have been made, who has made those submissions, what are the things that are being proposed in those submissions, right? And then the Commission is claiming that it is going to determine what the people want. Now, the people of Fiji are not a homogeneous entity. So you need to have a mechanism to determine what the people want. And so far they haven't told us what that mechanism is. In fact, they haven't even released all the submissions. So we don't even know what people are presenting. So how will we be able to assess that what the Commission eventually proposes reflects the wishes of the people? Right? Now, as I've said, the people of Fiji are not a homogeneous entity. There are various competing interests that people have. There are various competing views that people have. So unless these things are transparently articulated, presented to the public, and then the Commission in its report says, okay, we received, these are the submissions, these are the proposals that we received on this particular issue, how we deliberated upon it, and what is the rationale for our final proposal on that particular issue. So nobody will be able to, with the current level of transparency that we have, we won't be able to verify what the Commission eventually says is what the people want. Right? Also, the other big issue that I have with them is that they have not live streamed their proceedings, which is one of the easiest things to do now in today's day and age. I mean, even when the parliamentary committees hold hearings on ordinary legislation, they live stream it. Now, this is the country's constitution that we're talking about, which is going to have ramifications not just today, but for future generations, and that is going to significantly alter the course of this country, the political, social, economic trajectory of this country. Right? So that is how important the exercise is, and they're not even live streaming it when it is so cheap, so easy. You prop up a phone and you're online. That's how easy it is. And there is 2026. What the High Commission managed to achieve in terms of transparency in 2012, which was around 14 years ago, when technology was relatively, not as evolved as it is today. I mean, the advent of AI has radically changed things. The amount of information that you can, analyze in seconds, you do summaries and so forth and publish it. Publishing has also become so easy. You can develop a website within a day, for instance. And all that has not happened. So how do the people ascertain what the people have said, right?
How do you normally, what do you recommend that the commission go for, the CRC?
Well, there are a number of things that we recommended right at the outset, but I think that ship has sailed because they have basically ended their consultation.
That's right. Okay. Your submissions also in the argues in the 2013 Constitution gives more power to the executive. Why do you think that? I mean, or what's most evident in that?
Well, I think it is largely caused by a structural deficit in the Constitution, or a structural flaw, I would say, which is that the government essentially dominates the all-important Constitutional Officers Commission. So there's a 4:2 dominance of government over opposition on that particular commission. And that commission is responsible for appointing the heads of various oversight institutions or independent state institutions that have been established by the Constitution. So what this basically means in practice, and we've seen that happen, there's ample evidence, is that the government is able to make political appointments to various state institutions. So their person of choice gets installed in these various state institutions, and so that state institution then effectively comes under government control, because it is also possible for the government without much difficulty to remove those appointees. So they are always wary that they should not get on the wrong side of government. They shouldn't have a fallout with the government, because there have been instances where heads of various institutions have had a fallout with government and they did not last in them. So they don't have that security of tenure. So when the guys that formulated the 2013 constitution did so, perhaps they believed that they would be in power, forever, right? And so they have crafted a constitution which essentially consolidates the power of the executive. I mean, the Prime Minister has been mentioned some more than 100 times. The other peculiar thing about the Constitution is that the Attorney General is mentioned more than 60 times. If you take constitutions of other countries, they might not even have a mention of the Attorney General at all. He or she would be treated just like and have the same powers just like any ordinary minister. So the Prime Minister is all powerful, too powerful in fact, due to the amount of authority that is vested in that position by the 2013 Constitution. And our experience, of course, has been that it has led to an all-powerful political arm. The government has been all-powerful, and the various state institutions and other oversight mechanisms that we have in the Constitution have actually not been as efficacious as they should be in a democratic governance setup.
You've also recommended to the CRC that the Prime Minister only have 2 limits be reflected in the Constitution and a relatively smaller cabinet. How would these changes strengthen democracy?
Mm-hmm. Well, we have had in Fiji for a very long time the personalization of power. So one person comes into power, there of course is a personality cult kind of thing created around that person. Right? We saw that in the case of the former Prime Minister, Banuve. We also seeing the same thing around the current Prime Minister, Josephine Navula. So that personalization of power needs to end. The other thing that needs to happen is that there should be leadership renewal. So the younger generations, for instance, they should also get a fair chance at getting into parliament. I mean, if you look at the electoral system, it is quite neutral. It affords a chance to anybody to get into parliament. But the reality is that it is almost impossible for a young person to gain that kind of prominence that they need to become a prime minister of this country. Right? So leadership renewal is very important. The shift of leadership from one person to another, that can only happen when you put term limits on a person. You know, how long can they be prime ministers, for how many terms can they serve as prime ministers? There are other jurisdictions that have this precise provision in their constitution to bring about leadership renewal, and to also safeguard against one person sitting at the helm of government for a very long time, perhaps for decades. And so this kind of a constitutional provision can bring that about. The other thing that we mentioned there relating to the size of government. A big criticism right now is the size of the current government, which is the biggest cabinet in history. Nearly everybody that is on the government side and in the main ruling party is either a minister or assistant minister. And that obviously comes at a huge cost to Fijian taxpayers in terms of the salary bill, not just the salary bill, but the support services that each minister needs, and of course assistant ministers too. So in order to prevent a situation in the future where the Prime Minister uses cabinet positions as rewards, political rewards, inducements to get people to join cabinet and consolidate his power. So a cap of 15 we have proposed, and that is not arbitrarily selected. In fact, that number was arrived at in the Gai constitution, and I think we still believe that it is very suitable for a country of the size of Fiji to have a 15-member cabinet.
Thank you, Mr. Lal. Apparently time has caught up with us. We thank you for appearing on the show this morning. We'll stay with us. We'll go into a short break and we'll come back straight back.
Fam, welcome back. I bought this from Belo City for $4.50. An idea to use this beautiful frame to display my earrings. Also have this potato sack that I will use. So let's get crafty. It's done, and now we hang our earrings. Guys, and this is the final result. Look! Isn't it lovely? And now we can like hang it on the wall. This $4 frame that I thrifted from Belo City and the potato sack, I was able to achieve this look. This is proof that crafty can turn something old to something that is useful and beautiful again. Thank you for joining me. Naka Mode.
Welcome back to the brunch on my TV. That young lady, that lovely young lady rather, that we just saw was Jeanette Smith. Now, she's a mother of two, a homemaker, an entrepreneur, and content creator.
And she joins us live now from Taviuni, where she lives with her beautiful family. Good morning, Jeanette.
Good morning, everyone. Ruvinaka.
You look wonderful this morning, Jeanette.
Thank you, both of you too.
Vinaka. Now, Jeanette, what inspired you to start sharing your handmade creations online?
I did this way back in COVID-19 because I had nothing to do, and afterwards I went to university. And to be honest, I'm a university school dropout, and I had this dream of making a jewelry and skincare line, and yes, and it did inspire me with a lot of research, a lot of like experiments, and yes, I came up with all of this during COVID-19.
Social media has always given Fijian creators rather, a global audience. How has that helped you and your brand connect with your customers and share authentic Fijian craftsmanships with the world, Jeanette?
Social media has been a very good platform for people to connect with the world, especially for young women like me that has nothing to do, or they have dreams that they're doing, and it's also for their dreams to advertise, mostly if they are on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. These are the social medias that they can use to advertise their product that they're doing, and it also inspires other women to do and start chasing the dream.
Jeanette, social media can be exciting and challenging, like you would know. If you could
Yes.
encourage, someone out there who's just at home, who may be thinking of doing something similar, what is something you'd like to share with them to enable them, like you mentioned earlier, to enable them to pursue their dream?
Yes. Your beginning doesn't define your future. You can start with anything small, start with something, especially the resources that we have all around us. I start my jewelry with things I have from my fiance. He gave me resources. I did what I believe, and then later I did skincare. All the resources us. The ingredients I use for my skincare products are from locals. This way I support locals by buying ingredients. Um, and yes, I have some in baking the skincare products I do more for other women that are that have very sensitive skin. And yes, my contents are free on young women and especially women that can stay at home, online-based content for everyday lives, and yes, and jewelry and skincare is one of the things, or even baking is one of the things they can do to other women.
Well, thank you,
Yes.
Jeanette, for joining us this morning on The Brunch. We look forward to seeing more of your videos and awesome creations. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Now we cross live to the McDonald's Fijian Drua camp in Nandi, and we have with us their media officer, Josephine Navula, this morning. Morning, Josie.
Morning, Lucy.
Oh, I see that you have Michelle with you also. Hello, ladies.
Hi.
Okay, Josie and Michelle, it's the eve of the historic semifinals in Lautoka tomorrow. What's the mood like in camp? What's the morale like for the women?
So, the girls are excited and happy to play tomorrow. Right now, the practice coming up. Yes, we get training field. We are just practice coming up. The girls are really excited. Straight to their activations, getting around. Yeah, basically they're ready for the match tomorrow.
Talk to us about the team lineup for tomorrow.
Thank you. Yes, first, and as you all know, the squad will be captained by Colonel. There were no major changes to the side. Coach Beck is sticking with his four players. They played in round four on the match against Reds. So yeah, and no major changes. Just Colorado Loma captaining the side for the third match now, and yeah.
Also, the team has been through some changes over the last year, seeing the departure of Asenate Serevi and the welcoming coach Mike. How has the team evolved?
The team worked well. They've shown and uh, us to um, and and the props. Um, sorry, can you hear us now?
Okay. Michelle, I'll ask you this question tomorrow before the girls take on the Reds. There will be a Raluve game. This is the secondary school's rugby match for girls. And it'll be between Natambua High School and Jasper Williams High School. You know, your team is an inspiration for these young girls. What does this mean for you and the team to have these young girls look to you as examples of, where they can reach in their rugby career?
I think it's for it's it's very touching and it's exciting to see girls looking up to us and girls young girls wanting to follow the footsteps,
Some final
follow
words.
the footsteps us here. Hopefully that one day if they want to make it, like they have to keep pushing and just have that mindset if they want to be there.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies, for joining us this morning on The Brunch. Naka.
And now a look at our results of our last poll question.
We had asked, should sugarcane farmers boycott or take their canes to the mill?
60% of respondents said that farmers should boycott, while 40% believe farmers should take their cane to the mill.
This week we are asking if you could force the next government to completely fix just one major infrastructure issue during their term, which would you choose?
Let us know what you think by answering the poll question that is pinned at the top of the MyTV Facebook page.
Well, time has caught up with us this morning, and we hope that you've enjoyed the show.
Thank you for joining us this morning. For The Brunch, I'm Lusi Banuve.
And I'm Ilaitia Ravuwai. Have a great weekend.